probably wouldn't work in this case because usually it's in a very enclosed room and people aren't really moving around too much. I mean,
In a teleprompter too.
Yeah, I would probably use a Sony myself.
I'm looking at the Sonys or the Panasonic. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, something with a fast
LFG.
focus. Yeah.
We were talking over the chat, LFG.
John, look at the FX30.
FX, does it take E-glass?
It does?
It does, really?
Yeah, we saw it at CES. It was a really nice small camera. It's pretty decent.
I was going to get another A7, like an A7 IV.
Maybe heat will be a problem.
It hasn't been on my three.
A7 IV is pretty good. They finally fixed that.
Hey, John, are you going to weigh in on that question about the MSG Sphere?
Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. I drove by it the other day, and they're testing
Is
lights.
it finished yet? Is it finished yet?
No,
they don't even think it's going to be finished for the F1 race,
Yeah.
which was the big opening.
Well, there's one in London too, right?
I love how they put it next to the Top Golf area.
What? YouTube's going to do a show there?
YouTube, yeah. YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube's going to do a big screen. The whole thing is a screen, isn't it?
I don't know. I heard some rumblings that they were having some issues with you too. I don't know if they locked that in or
Inside and out.
There's been rumblings that MSG is going to go bankrupt before that gets done.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man.
Well, I guess they still haven't found what they're looking for, right?
They're going to have to change their name to Madison Round Garden.
I thought MSG was bad for you, isn't it?
Not at
they
all.
are selling. They are
Only
selling
Kung
a
Pao
lot
chicken.
of assets.
They're selling what? Did you say, Nigel?
They're selling a lot of assets
Really?
because that Sphere's like doubled in price. So,
Well, they tried to build it during the pandemic. If nothing else, then it's a huge venue.
You ever try to walk across the MGM Grand after being at NAB all day?
Yes, I have many times.
Oh,
It's
yes.
miles.
Many
Miles.
times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
MSG has sold its a stake in both the Knicks and the Rangers to get money to
Pay
finish
for it.
the Sphere.
Well, unfinished casinos and hotels is no stranger to Vegas.
Well, the Sphere's not in the greatest location. There's no walk-by traffic over there.
And Fontainebleau will open fairly
Where is
soon,
it?
so that's
It's behind the Venetian.
Fontainebleau has been under construction for what, 15 years?
Fountain Blue,
I thought they imploded it.
8.
No, they didn't employ it.
7 or 8,
8
I think
years.
it started. Actually, what's clever is that the original owners, I think, now own it again.
They bought it
For,
back
for dollars
At
on
half
the,
the pri-
pennies
half
on the
the-
dollars.
at 10% of the price. Yeah.
Yeah, it had been so vandalized. The construction site had been so vandalized, I'm sure it's going to cost a fortune.
Well, they sold a bunch of stuff out of the construction.
They should do a reverse implosion.
You mean just an explosion and take out the rest of Vegas?
No, have it have it explode upwards into construction.
Hey,
instead
remember
of
the first
downwards.
place they blew up in war games, Courtney? I was in the theater. Let's blow up Las Vegas.
Mars attacks.
You mean Mars attacks? Yeah. What'd they blow up in war games? They didn't blow anything up in war games, did they?
Yeah,
Tom
remember
Jones.
when they were doing thermonuclear war on the computer? On the
Oh,
IMSA,
on the computer.
IMSA 8080?
Yeah. I can't remember, yeah.
I think I know Alex's voice so well that I can tell even when he's clearing his throat.
I sorry about that.
You're clear.
Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. Now, our first hour, we typically answer your questions around media and all things digital production. And our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today, we'll be speaking with Tim Moore from View Technologies, and he'll discuss what's happening in the virtual production space and how their startup has been able to pivot to grow their virtual production network. So you want to stay tuned and get your questions ready, both for the first hour and the second hour. And speaking of questions, Bill, let's get this party started.
Absolutely, Liberty. The first one comes from Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois, and Kenny asks, some Office Hours panelists own the $499 M1 or M2 Mac Mini. 8 gigs of RAM with 256 gig solid state drive. What are your video uses for a single computer, and are some common video tasks not suitable for this configuration?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I have my M1. I have the M1 downstairs. I have the M2, which is right here, and basic tasks. I don't, you don't put too much onto the computer because then you find out that you're going to run out of RAM. You're going to run out of space easily, really quick. But downstairs, basically, all of my video production technically comes up to this computer up here, and then it goes down to the other computer when I'm in the studio. That way I don't have to worry about, I have a whole bunch of fan noises and other sounds. I just have that one device going in there. And then when I take it on the road, it's perfect for doing any type of video editing. But once again, I got to clean out what I'm doing down in the basement and then load up what I want when I do it in remote production. Because once again, you just got a very limited amount of RAM, limited amount of hard drive. So you want to keep it as clean as possible.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think that depends on how big the hard drive is that you put there. You can push these. I found that you can push the minis pretty hard. The only place that I've had a RAM issue has been with Resolve and some photogrammetry stuff that I've done. So opening up stuff in Final Cut hasn't been an issue at all. Opening things in Motion, I haven't seen any slowdown. It's been putting really, really heavy files into it. So it's done a pretty good job. And I buy a lot of the 8 gig versions. A reminder that we can do 8 1080p outs from one M1 Mini, the M2 definitely, even more easily. With an external SDI output. So it's a pretty beefy machine for what it is. And again, haven't really hit the RAM thing very often except for doing things that would be hard on most computers, to make that work. So they're very, very good at even at $499 or $599.
And I've used it similar to Jeffrey. It's a streaming machine, but also primarily for post-production. So editing, Adobe and whatnot, just for the power and the ease of use between software, like between applications, so that it doesn't slow down. So just like Jeffrey. And Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, for audio and video editing, I don't like to use computers with less than 16 gigs, but I'm just curious specifically with Resolve, where exactly would you see a performance problem? Do you actually see, does the application become non-responsive when you're trying to process something specifically?
Yeah, it was, it actually it was running out of RAM. Like I got a message that said I'm running out of RAM, but just to put it in perspective, these are not like little H.264 files or even ProRes files. These were Blackmagic raw files, 4 layers of them, 6K, opening them up in there. And so it was, and even when I opened them in a Mac Studio with an external drive, it was still chunky, so it was not, when I put it on the internal drive on the Mac Studio, then everything played fine. But it was so I think that it was these are files that would have made any computer I had previously chunk a little bit. But then with the photogrammetry with Metashape, you can get to a point where it just says I don't have enough RAM. It just caps out. But these are, to put it in perspective, it's 192 raw files it's a pretty heavy machine. I mean heavy calculation. So,
Bill?
Yeah, that's it. You have to calculate the load you're likely to put on the device and what its purpose is. When I was starting out, the fact that you could get any computer, particularly a powerful one, was pretty unheard of. Now they're so ubiquitous. I just bought a new MacBook Air M2 for my voice booth, the Air, because it doesn't have any fans, so it's perfect for that application. But I did not have to stuff a lot of configuration into it, because all I'm going to be doing basically in there is recording voiceover. Maybe I'll do Zoom occasionally for clients who want to direct a session, but that's it. And it's going to sit there the rest of the time waiting for it to make me the money to pay for its purchase through a very niche use. And that's all it was there for.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, when I first bought the M1 Mac Mini, when it first came out, the base model, I just walked into my local Best Buy and saw it sitting there, and I was like, ooh, I got to get one of those to try some stuff out. And I wound up just loving it because it was so fast, and wound up using it in production. A lot of it is just the NDI video monitor and routing stuff around. Right now, below this, my prompter is our Mukana stuff. But yeah, I was in Costco just this weekend, and those M1s are $669 was their previous price, and at the register they're $499 for the M1s. And then if you're an educator or have kids that are being educated, you can get them in the Apple Education Store now, the M2 for $499. What I wouldn't run, I tried banging on DaVinci Resolve, and I was not a happy camper due to the RAM. So if I'm going to buy another one, it's going to have the 16 gigs of RAM and most likely the 10 gig Ethernet port as well.
And Jeffrey?
Yeah, I just wanted to double down. I do love the M1. It's perfect. Like I said, with the Road machine, it becomes a second machine. So you can take your laptop, you can connect up to it, you can do all the work from the M1, and then disconnect it, use your laptop for other things. So that's what I really love about it. But one tip, if you're using any Adobe product and you're using the Frame IO, make sure that you turn off the cache, because it starts to download everything onto the computer. That's where you start running out of resources. And I have a feeling Resolve's got something very similar to that.
And Alex?
So Guy, students can buy with that student discount as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, the big thing is that the way we've used Mac Minis in the past is, I've owned tens and tens of 30, 40 Mac Minis, and we use them as glue. And at $499, $599, we use them for scopes. We use them for processing things, managing, and I've been using them since they were released that way, as key servers, as everything else. And the fact that these M1s and M2s can do so much now is
You're muted.
Starting to build up some render nodes, for some of my apps that I just sit over somewhere and just have them, sending out renders from Cinema 4D or other things to them. So anyway, there's a huge advantage of having lots of little computers as opposed to just one big computer.
And Guy?
Yeah, one of the videos I was watching last week on the M1 versus M2 is be aware of the disk speed. There's some interesting videos on YouTube that the M1 is way faster on the disk speed, and they actually open it up and they show you the chip that's in there. So if you go to an M2 with a bigger drive like the 512, you might want to double check if it's faster, because I'm pretty sure that was the case, was that the 256 was like super slow, like 700 megabytes a second, versus the previous generation was 1200. So if disk performance is important to you, then take a look at getting the bigger hard drive on a custom build, or just buying the model that already the next step up from the $599 version.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael in next with, what was your favorite Super Bowl halftime show production element?
Nigel?
So I thought they did a very good job with the raising and lowering of the platforms. I don't know how they managed, I'm sure they got it right, but with an open dome stadium, getting that work I thought was very, very impressive. I really liked that. I have to admit I only recognized one of the songs, but I'm very old.
Yes, the raising, that was a good look. Courtney?
Yeah, I agree. The flying platforms and everybody was safetied off, which you could see. And how they did a Skycam shot. I don't know how they flew the Skycam in there with all those cables going crisscrossing across the stadium for those flying stages. They did a shot through the crisscrossed wires halfway up above the stage, and I don't know if it was a drone shot or if they especially arranged one particular passage and combined it with a zoom, but it was pretty amazing. And I also like the the Steadicam with a gimbal on the end of it, so that they can go from high mode to low mode, and they flipped you over in the middle of a shot with the Steadicam. That was a pretty amazing shot. Though I do think she lip synced about 90% of that whole sequence.
Jason?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a gimbal roll on national television. I mean, never. Seriously, never. The camera work was incredible. The camera, the cinematography was great. What really struck me was, aside from the spatial audio, was the white uniforms and the way that they were lighting them the whole time. And they just completely, vividly changed them with strobes, with blue, with red, and it was gorgeous.
John?
My favorite production element was they had about 100 people after the halftime show filling in the divots like you do when you go golfing. And did you see everybody slipping on the turf? They had a big problem with the turf.
Alex?
Yeah, I thought it was such a classic. It was perfect for as an Apple show, because it was like, we're going to do something that looks really simple, but if you watch, it's going to be really complicated. So when I saw it, I was like, wow, they really didn't build very much for this. And as it kept on going, I think overall I was just amazed that again, what was mentioned before, there were some camera shots that you were like, I don't know how they're doing that, and so it was very hidden tech rather than all the craziness. It was still crazy, I'm sure, but there was something about it being very simple but very hard at the same time.
You actually articulated what a lot of people who were commenting on the halftime show is like, it was trash, or it was not being impressed with it because
Right.
you're used to all these different artists.
Yeah.
But you articulated well. It's like the camera work, the lighting, and all of those elements that came into play.
Yeah.
Guy?
Yeah, I'm just blown away by the amount of replay. You guys got to look at what's going on behind the scenes there. It's incredible, because you think of it, they got 30 channels plus of replay. And after every big play, they're winding back 4 or 5 of them. So you look at all those angles, and you look at the operators in the truck. I was lucky enough to go in the actual Game Creek truck when it was here in Seattle that they used on the Super Bowl. And seeing that layout, it's mind-blowing how much work that is and how much data is being pumped through. It is incredible. So if you get a chance to rewatch some of that, look at all the various angles, because it's like, who has it? Who has this shot? And there was one play that they said when it was called to verify the play, if the guy was 2 feet or 3 feet, I think was the call, and they were like, "Oh, we finally found the angle," and they bubbled it up, and that was what changed the call. So it's pretty amazing what they can do on the field and through comms.
Mitchell?
Yeah, the flying Rihanna was very impressive. I was told on After Hours that it was the Foy brothers who rigged that gag. Nicely done. And I think they need to add a changing of the cleats as part of the halftime exercise.
And what she did really well, in addition to everything that has been shared, is she actually brought a lot of the Savage Fenty elements to it. The camera work is a lot of what we saw. And just going into the comments, Brody shares one of the regular panelists knows the firm that handled the flying platforms. He said they also produce many flying elements in Broadway theaters. So seeing how those worlds came together last night during the halftime show.
It's funny. You realize there's probably a company that just flies people. Like, oh yeah, we do flying pipe. Like, what do you do? I do flying platforms. That's what I do.
Right. Niching down.
Yeah, exactly.
They did that well. And Courtney?
Yeah, nobody mentioned the choreography. I thought the costume design for all the hundreds of dancers and the synchronization between the dancers was almost perfect. And I don't know, they may have had to have play out, arranged speakers so that all the, I don't think they had in-ear monitors for all the dancers so that they could all stay in sync with each other. It was pretty amazing when you're hearing delayed music echoing around that stadium. It's kind of hard to stay in sync with the beat. And one other thing that was very carefully rehearsed, the cutting. Obviously, the coverage was well rehearsed, because you had to look very carefully to see the dancers hook up the safety lines to the dancers that were on the platforms when they went on and off the platforms. And when they would dismount, they'd cut to the exterior of the stadium with the fireworks going off, and they'd cut back and they're off the platforms. So they hid all the technical issues that they had to deal with in something that dangerous. very well. You had to look very closely. It was only visible in a couple of frames to see them, where the dancers, the stagehands, and all the Steadicam operators were dressed in the same white outfits as the dancers, so they blended in.
Oh, nice. I didn't see that part. So we're discussing the Rihanna halftime show at the Super Bowl yesterday, as someone shared in the comments, and doing this all while being safe. I think you mentioned that, Courtney, earlier, being safe because she is also pregnant and doing the entire show. So kudos to the entire team that put that together. Next question.
John, looks like Born Trigger says, anyone have any thoughts on this new venue where you two will perform? It's the MSG Sphere, Madison Square Garden Sphere. 16K screen, 164K speakers. P.S. We might want to arrange a meetup, and that's in Las Vegas.
Alex?
Do we know if that's operational yet? Is it? I know that it's
we were
not
talking about
built
it
yet.
pre-show. I don't think it is. I think it's still in construction.
When it is, we should talk to some folks there and see if we can't go visit it. I have been to a theater with a couple more speakers and a little bit higher res screen, and it's definitely worth checking out. so anyway, but I think it looks really like a great experience. This is, I think, where a lot of this projection and everything else has to go. I don't know if you need a band down there to do it. I think that they're building it for a band, but I think just doing events that are in that kind of sphere, being able to have something that is like that's immersive, gives people a reason, and thinking about the content for that. A planetarium without the big thing up the center, and thinking about how to design and create something for that, I think would be, at that scale, would be really fun.
Nigel?
I'm sure Mr. Predo will give you more accurate information, but the last thing I heard was they had hoped it would open for the F1 race in November, but they don't think they're going to make that date. They think they'll be able to project on the outside, but actually inside won't be ready till next year. I know that MSG is starting to sell a few assets to raise enough money to finish this project. The other thing I heard, which I thought was pretty interesting, was because of the inside, particularly in how different it was, bands touring through are going to have to rethink how they perform with inside, and it will actually give them an opportunity to do things they couldn't do on a normal stage, but that's going to make some of the touring bands have to rethink about the cost and implications of that.
Courtney?
And if they don't run out of money before they get the Las Vegas one open, there's one planned for London as well. In downtown London, they've been arguing over the zoning and the position of it with the that other big stadium that's there next to the Big Eye. I don't know if they've even started construction yet, so that's ahead of them as well. And I can't imagine what it would be like to phase align 164,000 speakers.
And John?
I'm born and raised in Vegas, and this thing's going up, and it's funny now when you drive by it that there's green, and they're putting the LEDs on the top, and they're programming everything, and so it's coming along. I've heard they're running into some challenges, and there were some issues with U2. I don't know if that got fully resolved. The other thing is it's not on the Strip. It's behind the Venetian across the street from the Wynn. So it's not in the greatest location. It's good for F1 because the F1 cars are going to go right by it, but we'll see.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight here on the panel from Vancouver, British Columbia. How do I add borders around the boxes in my SuperSource on an ATEM? The border option under the Art tab is not accessible.
Alexander, do you want to put some more context on that before Alex responds?
Well, it's just weird. I know people can do it, but I don't know if they're using mix effect or if they're just adding the graphics in and importing them in. So as far as I can see natively, I don't see a way to do it because I can't select the border option.
Alex?
Yeah, I thought that I guess my understanding was that the border was not in it was in the main option, not in the, and I'm trying to find it right now. I don't know why my understanding for the SuperSource was that it was part of the main option, not part of the art option. But you're seeing it in the border, and you have
if I go to the art tab now in SuperSource, if you scroll down, you can see there's a border area there, but it's completely grayed out. You can't select it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the. Oh, I see. Because it's not there, and then you go into the art tab and.
While we're pulling that,
yeah,
Mitchell,
we'll have to come back.
Go
ahead, Mitchell.
I was going to say they also have a number of different tutorials how to use Photoshop to create frames that you can then key, but you can't adjust it. It just must be adjusted to the Photoshop frame.
Yeah. I think that the issue there is that you with Photoshop, when you're using it, and I have to admit that I'm looking at the ATEM one. Alex, are you using the MixEffect Pro, or are you just using the regular?
I'm not
ATEM
using
software?
MixEffect at all. I don't have it.
I have to admit that I don't know how to use the SuperSource in ATEM anymore. So any updates to the SuperSource? Why I'm kind of trying to go through the ATEM, and I realized, why does this not look normal? It's because I think almost everybody I know that uses SuperSources now uses MixEffect Pro, and the reason is because the SuperSources, in my opinion, on an ATEM are almost unusable in the core software. Like maybe not completely unusable, but very, very close. And I can promise you that if you get MixEffect Pro, you'll never look back at, MixEffect Pro has a lot of tools that I don't use, but the one that almost all of us use for it is the SuperSource tools. And the ability to transition from one to the other, to the other, to the other, be able to seamlessly move things around and adjust them is so much better than the ATEM. I wouldn't bother. I mean, the software is really great for the ATEM software. The SuperSources were inaccessible, almost completely inaccessible before MixEffect Pro existed. We used them, but it was always like, oh, do we have to? Do we have to turn these on? It was a huge oversight because it was one of the most powerful parts of the switcher that Blackmagic completely ignored or whatever. I don't know what happened there, but it just was not ever developed. MixEffect Pro makes it like suddenly a great. I mean, I have run shows 100% of the show in front of 30,000 people watching, just tapping on an iPad, going between SuperSources on MixEffect Pro. So it's a really great app.
And Alexander, you might want to check out some of the comments in the chat, and then also Sky, because when they did Mad in the Kitchen, now almost 2 years ago, they had Square SuperSources. So maybe they might be able to have a solve. So again, speak to Sky to see how they were able to do that. Because at that time, I don't know that MixEffect was even on the office hours radar.
I don't think it was, but it was. Yeah. It's super painful. Like as soon as I just promise that there's very few things that we'll just say, oh, you should just go get, but you really should. Like it's not worth the time. Like it's not worth the time to learn how to use a SuperSource inside of the ATEM software. You'll be super frustrated when you get MixEffect Pro and realize how much time you poured into a hole. Yeah.
And Mitchell plus one's that next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran, Seattle, Washington. What do you think of WebEx NDI?
Alex?
It kind of looks like what Zoom was doing before Liminal showed up. like it looks like they're as a process of catching up, they're starting to get there. I think it points to everyone understands that building shows outside of the app, the native app, is going to be important. So even WebEx can have new tricks, but so far the implementation looks like kind of the Zoom Rooms implementation of NDI. So nothing major yet, but I think that it should be a wake up call for both Teams and Zoom to know that everybody's going to go down this path, and so it's just a matter of time.
Next question.
John Filer in Greenfield, Massachusetts says older model Stream Decks are on sale on Amazon, including the 32-button XL for only $199 US. Who has tried the new one with dials?
Nigel.
Yes, I have the 32, the 15, and the Plus. The 32 is by far the best. I use that most regularly. The 15 sits on another machine, which is just useful for quick tapping. I did get the new one. I have to tell you, I think the buttons are a little noisier. They're much bigger. I think they're a little noisier. There's only 8 on the panel at any mine, and which is really very few, particularly when you're used to being able to operate the 32 without looking at it. And to be honest with you, I have found fairly little use for the dials yet. I'm hoping that more applications will come through.
So are you saying that the 32, you still use that more than the new one?
Oh, I do. So I have 2 Macs in my setup, and I have one on the left and one on the right. The 32 sits on the left, and the 16 sits on the, 15 sits on the right. And the one on the left is use companion, and that's with mix effect and all of that stuff. The one on the right is much more day-to-day task and routines. It's how I set up for office hours with a single button press. And those are great. I've got this new one. It was a birthday present. It's really only got 8 buttons on it. And the moment you have to start going to multiple screens, I find that really slows you down. And 8 is very few buttons, and they're noisy.
John?
I have to tell you an interesting story. I don't know how long ago was it, Alex? Was it 2 years ago where somebody found an amazing deal on Stream Deck? Might have been Jeffrey.
I'm still waiting for that. I'm still waiting for that Stream Deck.
We found the 32 button for like $49.
No, it was
we
like
all
99.
bought
it was $99.
whatever
I think.
it was.
Yeah.
And it was all a big fraud. So be careful.
It was. I'm still. It was someone who it was like a genius move of scam where they got it into a state in Amazon where there's nowhere to process it. There's nowhere to say I didn't get it. There's nowhere to say, like there was no good place. You'd have to like call Amazon and try to explain to them, and I never did. So I'm still waiting for it to show up. But it was a genius scam because it said it's on its way. But then when it's on its way, there's a state there that Amazon can't do anything with, and put a lot of people in that state.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight, Vancouver, British Columbia. If Blackmagic put a more powerful processor into a future ATEM Mini, what would you want to see them do with it?
Courtney?
Yeah, I'd like to see them add SuperSource to the ATEM Mini Pro. And I'd also like to see them, unfortunately, it's going to compete with another one of their products, the HyperDeck. I'd like to see them put more memory for the media players and add another media player. So if they had 2 media players in the Mini Pro, and they added maybe just 8 gigs of flash memory storage on board so that you could store media clips and it could play out media clips from the media player, that would be key, would be very helpful to me.
I like that flash drive idea. Mitchell?
I agree with Courtney. I think a mini HyperDeck inside of it would be wonderful, even if it's just 5 seconds.
And Alex?
I'd love to have another SuperSource. We were just talking about that. I mean, it is super useful to have 2 super sources available because you can build bigger grids. I mean, in fact, if I was going to, the thing that is when you have Mix Effect Pro, again, and I don't get anything from Adam by talking about Mix Effect Pro, by the way, like it's just when you have it, it's a lot easier to do a lot of things, and you suddenly want to do a bunch of other things, with that. I would agree that I would love to see a larger cache so that we could run full sweepers. I mean, that's the big thing is I need basically at 1080p. I really, I'm hoping I would love to get 3600 frames, and I would love to have 2, 3, or 4 of those, in the system so that I can have, good sweepers and be able to play small elements and then be able to do it. Better yet, I would love for it to have some kind of NVMe. I was thinking about this the other day. I'd love to have an NVMe slot in the bottom that I could just push in there and then essentially put a HyperDeck into the ATEM, so that I can just put a 4 terabyte, NVMe into the bottom of it. And they don't buy it. I have to buy it, but they just put a slot in there for storage, and then I could just store stuff there. And I think that would be, that'd be a lot of fun. Like it would turn that thing into a beast.
And into a workhorse. Yeah. John?
Boy, the guys hit most of it. I would like to see 4K, SDI, and HDMI both on the thing, but not having a media player. That means video and pictures, Blackmagic together. Just crazy.
Great definition there, Alexander.
Yeah, I think all those points are excellent. One of the things that I'm very curious about, and as far as I'm concerned, is a bit of a deficit when I look at a lot of the Roland switches out there. Roland will put scalers on every single input. I don't understand why Blackmagic doesn't do that.
It does. All the ATEMs, all the ones that are built that are black. The gray ones don't have scalers, but every ATEM that's built that has a black case has a scaler on every input.
And then in the comments, Jesse says, simpler macro editing, plus 1,000 on that one. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Alex, you mentioned the Mac Mini being useful as glue. Could the M2 Pro Mac Minis, I'm getting mine today, and he's got 32 gigabytes of RAM, 4 terabyte SSD, a 12-core CPU, and a 19-core GPU, be enough to serve as a main audio workstation, for example?
Mitchell?
Douglas, nothing to worry about. You were in great shape with that system. You could even get by with an M1 to do audio work with Logic. So not to sweat any details. You're well covered.
Alexander?
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that. Mitchell hit it.
On the nose. Jeffrey?
The bigger issue is when you start getting into multi-channels. You get 16 channels, you get 32 channels in there, and you're using a whole bunch of plugins to compress, to EQ, to all that other stuff. And so the bigger, the better. And the best part is in the last year, Mac has introduced the GPU to audio. I don't know if it's a plugin or whatever it is, where you can actually use the GPU to actually bring or help along whatever you're doing. So it's a very beefy computer. It'll work really well, unless you're doing like 5,000 channels and doing a whole bunch of plugins for it.
And Alex?
Yeah, my experience from working in Logic is that, I mean, even on a very small machine, it does a really good job. Like it's even on a little M1, I think this is you have a much beefier M1. I think that you're going to find that something like, especially things, you just want to look at what's been optimized and what hasn't been optimized. So I doubt that, I think there is an M1 version of Pro Tools. I'd probably be very careful. Pro Tools tends to take a little time to grow into a new piece of hardware. And so I'd be careful with that, but it might be there. I think that you're probably going to find that Logic and some of the other ones are going to work. They're really written to the stack. And so I think that it's going to be, I think that you'll find that something like Logic will probably run, I bet you, a couple hundred channels pretty well. So by the way, I this is only tangentially connected, but if you're playing with audio workstations, I don't remember Owl City, the band Owl City they had a single called Fireflies. And the guy, I guess I thought Owl City was like a band. It's a guy. Like it's a guy in Minnesota. Anyway, so he put up a couple days ago in Logic. I have a tendency to watch lots of Logic behind the scenes. So anyway, he put up this great breakdown of Fireflies. Like I was up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I wrote the song, and he just breaks it all down. But I think that it's really important to watch these if you can find them on YouTube. And I would just do a search for Logic, Fireflies, Owl City. And I would, look for that because it's a great 15 minutes, I think. It was, like of him breaking down, well, then I did this, and then I did this. And he actually pointed out that there's a chord that was wrong. And he just said, I only noticed it a couple years ago. Someone pointed it out a couple years ago or something like that. So I would highly recommend it if you're into Logic and you're looking at music getting put together. And these are the kind of answers that you get when we don't have a lot of questions. So we just kind of stretch.
Stretch, yes. And speaking of questions, we do have some space for a few more of your questions before we get to the top of the hour with Tim Moore and View Technologies. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Dory Miles in Lake Zurich. All of my email goes to Comcast.net. I have not found any way to change that or even forward the email. Does that mean they own me?
Jason?
They don't own you, but they do have an exceptional marketing profile that is just perfectly dialed in exactly for everything that you do and see on the internet. There is a way around this, but really you should just one by one start getting away from Comcast. You could also import your Comcast email through Gmail. But again, if you don't pay for a service, you are the product, and that includes a free Gmail account.
Alex?
Yeah. The hard part is that there's never really any way to seamlessly get rid of your email. So there is people will send you emails there forever, and you have to decide who's important and who's not, and make sure that they get the new email. The easiest way to do it, you can try to tell people that you should use a new email, but the easiest thing to do is just create a new Gmail account or whatever you want to use, and then just start sending everybody emails that way and start signing up for things that way. And when you can go back and turn those things off, you'll probably leave your Comcast on, but over time it will become less and less important. But you'll check it every once in a while to make sure that there's and what I would recommend is setting up filters if you can, and you can do with any of these accounts. You can bring them in. It depends on what you have, but like with Apple Mail, I just have all my accounts go into my Apple Mail. So I've got this long list of different emails that someone could send me an email by, and they all go into the same place. And then in there, I can set up filters to filter out all this junk. And what you can do there is that way, if something pops up in your Comcast, but then just respond to it in your new email, people just tend to ignore you telling them. I have found that people tend to ignore you telling them you have a new email. It's just easier to send them the email, start sending emails from the email you want to use, and it just slowly winds its way out. But I still have emails. I mean, I still have people sending me emails on things that are, decades old.
Courtney?
A good idea is sometimes to register your own domain. And if you go to a domain registrar, register a domain that you're going to keep forever and license. You're going to have to pay for it annually. But almost all of them come with free email, five or so email boxes. And then you just have everything sent to that email address, and you can forward it to your ISP, Comcast email address. So you can forward all the mail that comes to your domain to Comcast if Comcast only lets you use their mail servers on that ISP. So outwardly, you're only exposing your own domain name, your own domain mail. And that way you can keep it and move from ISP to ISP and still keep the same email address across multiple ISP.
And John?
I've been on the internet since 1988 when you could do the whole internet in a weekend. And so my suggestion for email is to register your name, like mine, John. My email is john@predo, and that is sustained 30 years. And it never changes. Your job changes, etc. But your name is the best thing to do. Exactly what Courtney just said. Register your own domain. Use email. I'm not a fan of Outlook. I'm not a fan of Apple Mail because the databases build up over time so large that they become really cumbersome. And so all of my emails are either on Gmail or now Fastmail. I'm having really good luck on Fastmail.
What is it you like about Fastmail?
It's super feature rich and it's fast. I haven't had any problem. It's super affordable and they've got almost all the same features you could do in Gmail.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Robert Barrow in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, "Good morning, all. My wife has been using my older Tactile Pro4 keyboard, but she's experiencing wrist and hand pain due to the switches they use for the keys. Does anyone have any recommendations for a quality keyboard that has softer keys? Thanks."
Mitchell?
I do. The Apple keyboard. Very soft, very easy to use. And in comparison, my IBM, which is behind me, clickety-clack. And that's probably the problem you have. And if you don't like either of those suggestions, go to Logitech. They have a ton of keyboards there.
And Alex?
Yeah, I'm on the same path of trying to find one. I got one of the Logitech ones thinking it would be, I was asking for a quiet one on Twitter. And so the Logitech was the one that I just ordered. I'm also going to, we'll probably talk about this more. I'm going to order a Nuphy, N-U-P-H-Y. It's my EBS operator a couple shows ago was using one, and I asked her what she was using because I'd never seen that keyboard before. And she's like, "Oh, I love this keyboard." And so a Nuphy is another one that I'm taking a look at, and I'll be probably getting a couple other ones just to try to figure it out because I'm trying to do the same thing where I'm trying to find something that is really, really quiet, and I have not been successful yet. But I will say that the Logitech, and I'm trying to come up with the exact one, but the Logitech one, what I would say is here's the advantage of it. I got the Logitech MX mechanical wireless performance keyboard, tactile quiet switches, and they are not as quiet as the Apple keyboard. So what I have right now is an Apple keyboard, and I wanted to find something that's quieter and better, and it's not. So the keys feel better than the Apple keyboard. I have a wired Apple keyboard, so the keys feel better, but in the Logitech, but they're not as quiet as the Apple keyboard to type on. The other problem that I have is that my Apple wired keyboard, I have my trackball goes into my keyboard and then into a KVM. For whatever reason, the KVM doesn't support two inputs, like two things to go into it. And when I plug in, when I try to plug my, the wireless one only has one USB out to go into the KVM. So I have a slightly different need, which is that I have to have something, I can't be wireless. It has to be wired into a KVM to control all the computers. And so in that environment, I haven't found the Logitech's probably going to go home mostly because I can't connect it to that. But it's a better keyboard. I will say that it feels better than the Mac keyboard, but it's not as quiet.
And Mitchell?
I also have the wired Apple keyboard. And by the way, Apple doesn't make wired keyboards anymore. They're all Bluetooth connected. You can buy them used or refurbished from OWC.
Or you keep them like they're gold.
Or that. There is that.
But those ones typically, because I still have that. And now that you said that, I didn't even put the two and two together, but it makes so much noise. That's the only thing. And just coming in from the comments, Chris says, the Logitech MX Keys Advanced Wireless, a new illuminated keyboard. That's his recommendation. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota says tips on getting the most value from a real live human personal assistant.
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I think you're going to get the most use out of your personal assistant when they are doing things that you could do, but it's better use of the time for them to do it. So for me, it's managing calendar, it's working expenses, it's being the person I can delegate organization of events or meetings to. I could do all of those things, but it's better use of my time if they do them. A few tips, though, I would tell you. Number one, you've got to make sure whoever you have doesn't speak for you. You've got to be clear that they are your assistant, they are not you, because people will, particularly in a large organization, if you're not careful, confuse those two things. You have to constantly communicate with that person. You've really got to make sure you have a flow. We have a regular meeting twice a week just to check on things. And the other thing I always think, let them know what you like and what you don't like. Don't make them guess it. If you don't like certain things in the way that meetings are organized or your expenses are done or something, you've got to communicate that, because otherwise you're going to get frustrated they can't read your mind.
And following up on what Nigel said, and I'm reading real live as in also a person, a physical person that can possibly run errands for you. Because I remember a year or two ago, something happened with my Blackmagic, my 4K, and it was dead on arrival, and I was traveling. So to have someone that I could physically ship it to, they went into the store to be able to do that. So I think a physical task, if there's things that need to be mailed out and things that those types of activities that they can do for you, I highly recommend reading The 4-Hour Workweek, because in that book, Tim Ferriss breaks down just when you're getting started, how to source a virtual or an assistant and how to actually manage them. As Nigel shared, just they're really learning you to be able to do some of those tasks, and so that you can operate in your genius zone, which whether it be production or sales, you can really focus on those high touch activities that you're doing, and then that way they can handle those other ones to free up your time. So having a clear list of their activities or what they need to do, and having them check in once those are accomplished. It's not micromanaging. It's really being clear that things have been checked off. I find it also helpful to have a sync day or a sync time. So if we have a sync meeting on Tuesdays, once we've got that, it might not be that we necessarily have a call, but maybe it's Thursday, there's a email communication that, hey, here's where I am, here's what I need help with. I'm still waiting on you for those tasks, because again, you're out there in your genius zone, and their whole job is to help alleviate things that are on your plate. So that's what I've found helpful in having a live assistant. Alex.
Yeah, the temptation will be at the beginning is to take things back because they didn't do it the way you would have done it. And you need to communicate what's missing. Don't say, well, I can't depend on somebody to do it. Figure out how to tell them what you need done. Because the thing is that they, a good assistant will get really, really good at knowing, exactly the way you like. If you communicate those things, I think it's hard because I think sometimes when I had someone that was assisting me, I wasn't the only project, but I had probably 2 or 3 people that I was a big part of their day, and I had to be okay with saying what my frustrations were about weird little things, I didn't like that, because I would get this ping after I stayed in a hotel room, yes, no, and I'd be like, no, or yes, or this is what it didn't have, and everything else, and they just slowly tied in all those things so that it was pretty effortless, but it takes time to have that settle in. It's not going to be, usually you're not going to find someone who knows everything about how you like to do things or what you like for a while. But I've also worked with a lot of personal assistants for big executives, and they're it's most of them could, for the big executives, most of them could be CEOs at a company because they then are able to communicate that out for them. And so I highly recommend it. Calendar is the first thing. Travel is another one. And then errands and shipping.
And also to add on to that is that if they've been doing this for some period of time, they're going to have processes that will help you. So being okay, as Alex said, to like take your hands off and let them bring some of their expertise to the table to just help your overall workflow. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, is talking about a new Windows 11 PC that was never used to browse the internet, contacted not only Windows Update, MSN and Bing servers, but also Steam, McAfee, geo.prod.do, and Comscore scorecardresearch.com. Who's going to use these for production?
Courtney.
I use a lot of Windows machines for production. I typically try and buy machines like this Melee that have stripped down versions of Windows 11. They don't have a lot of the bloatware. They don't come with the bloatware. They have Windows 11 Pro on them. And since they don't have the bloatware. And the other thing is to don't connect it to the internet. You can connect it to a local area network. Just make sure that local area network doesn't have an internet connection on it. If it can't find an internet connection, all the bloatware that tries to contact the mothership doesn't try anymore. And you can disable Windows Update for at least 7 days. And I find that there's a place, I'll put a link in the event chat, that details how, if you don't buy one of these, if you buy a full-size desktop or something that has a fully loaded with the bloatware that Microsoft crams on there for the money, I'll put an article. I'll paste a thing in the chat on an article on how to remove a lot of that bloatware.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I use a lot of HP Z workstations, and I'm sort of transitioning over to Apple again. I've always used Apple to edit with, but here's the thing. When you buy the computer from the manufacturer, in this case HP, they add their own bloatware to the system, and a lot of that probably is what you're complaining about. It's best to just wipe that computer and install everything clean so that you control what gets in there and what doesn't. As I was saying, the editing work that I do, I have to air gap, so I can't be connected to the internet. So that's the other way to deal with it, is to simply not be connected.
And Jeffrey?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these OEMs will put in, because McAfee doesn't come with a regular. If you installed your own version of Windows, you wouldn't get McAfee, you wouldn't get Steam or anything like that. So wiping the computer clean, starting with operating system, and then just bring it in from there. That's going to be your best bet. And as for the Windows Update, even Apple has goes and searches to find the next version, the updates. So you're going to have that same problem across the board.
And Alexander.
All good advice. One of the things I do is I absolutely would wipe the PC. Once upon a time when I used to build Windows computers, that I would always do custom installs. Regarding the update process, I believe with Windows Pro, I would try to get a Windows Pro license if you can. If not, just get something that comes with it, because you have more fine-grained control over what updates get installed. With Windows Home, you just get the, I don't think you can indefinitely delay the major insider updates, whatever quarterly updates that they do, but on the Pro version you can.
Next question.
Chris Sabato in Albany, Oregon says, I have a 4-rack unit case that has lots of gear packed in it, including a 1-unit power strip with outlets on both sides. What can I do to make sure the wall warts on the inside don't come unplugged?
Alexander?
Yeah, one of the ththings that I like to do is use gaff tape for a lot of things, and you can just rip off a little piece of gaffer's tape and just secure it there. The better solution that I like to use is I get these little power pigtails. So I take all the weight of the brick off the back, and also it allows me to actually put more of them on the back, because a lot of these power bricks are too wide. A lot of rack mount power conditioners will have certain outlets that are spaced far enough apart, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes you just get a brick that's just way, way too big. So power pigtails, that's what I use.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, warts are the devil. Simple as that. So, but yeah, you can also it really depends on what type of ward is powering. Like for instance, with guitarists, you have guitar pedals, and the back of these pedals are all 9-volt. They're all exactly the same. So what you do is you get a power brick for your pedal board, and with that power brick, it has those pigtails, as Alexander mentioned. So you're not plugging in the warts into a power strip. You are plugging in just the plugs, and of course, you're doing the ones with the correct polarity. Once again, a pedal is always positive, negative, the same polarity on there. So you just have to watch out for that. And then you can get some of these bricks that can go up to 12 volts and down to 3 volts, or whatever you need. So replacing them with this brick could actually help you pare down on your system.
Bill?
+1 on Alexander's suggestion of shorty cables. I have a bunch of them in 6, 12, and 18 inches. And if I have to go into a power wart, I just use that in the actual plug, string it down to where the little adapter can sit in the bottom of the rack, and then tack those cables down inside.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Another plus for the pigtails, they work great. What I usually do with the wall warts, if I have to use them, is to strap them so that they are secure with the prongs pointed out, and then to put the pigtail over that and then have it loop over to the outlet box. That seems to work well, particularly if your rack gets bounced around. And then if you find they have an awful lot of USB power warts that are plugging in, try to go with a USB distribution block like Anker has.
Alex?
Yeah, and when you zip ties are really good, just to zip tie them to what they're actually going to. It minimizes heat, but keeps them there. The pigtails are also useful. Also think about the fact that if they're all 12 volts or they're all whatever, you can build custom things that are just supplying the 12 volt or the 8 volt or 18 volt, and not, you have to build it, or you can buy some. There's some people who build those services that you just get rid of all the words, and so when people are really building these for permanently, they usually start to go down that path.
Courtney?
Yeah, all my flight cases, I build power supplies. I'll buy off the shelf like a 10 amp, 12 volt power supply, and I'll just make little distribution wires that come off of that, that wire off of that. They go to everything that needs a 12 volt power supply, and then I'll use something like this, which is, as was mentioned, a 5 volt power supply for anything that uses USB-A type power to barrel connector, whatever. They use their own wall warts, so this can replace 5 wall warts. And for the things that have custom power supplies that are in wall warts that are hardwired, I use dual lock Velcro, which is a hard Velcro that you can find online. It's fairly expensive. It's about $3 a foot. But you put that on. It has a great adhesive on the back of it, a 3M adhesive that sticks even when something heats up. So I put that on both sides, just a little strip of it to hold the wall wart into the plug. And that stuff usually stays and keeps it from vibrating out or falling out when it's shipped.
And in the chat, Mickey shares, if you have multiple devices that run on the same voltage, you can build or buy a DC distribution system to power all the devices from a single source. Jeffrey?
And if you're going to do something in a multi-distribution, DC distribution, make sure you're not only looking at the volts of the plug, but also the amps. So like, for instance, Courtney showed that multi-USB device. Some of the devices need 3 amps to run, like a supercharge in the USB port. So a lot of those will either do 1 amp or 2.5 amps. And then, of course, you're finding if you're going to be using those in something that needs like 3 amps, then like a video distribution system, then you might be finding that the battery starts to die out or the power starts to die out. You get little brownouts there.
Next question.
Chris Weiner, Lafayette, Indiana, is back again with the struggles to get open API access and the backsliding of certain platforms on API access. Is there a list of companies or platforms with good API access?
Go ahead, John.
Not sure which companies you want API access to. We use OpenAI because we don't have to pay. They've got a simulator built in. For example, OpenAI has an API access, but it costs money. So if you query the Da Vinci model, it's 2 cents for 750 words, and so we can do all our development through Open API and do all the work over there, and then when we go into production, we hook it up so we start getting paid. So that's the reason why we use open API. But I'll talk to you offline about it, Chris. Thanks.
Next question.
Brian Carney in Wheaton, Illinois says, I'm flying domestically with lithium camera batteries for production. Is there a limit to how many I can have as a carry-on or how many I can store in my checked luggage and or cases? I also need to start filming within an hour of hitting the ground.
Alex?
Yeah, I don't. You should check with your airline to know. I think it's usually 2. For what you could take on the carry-on. It depends on the size of the batteries. I've taken lots of batteries, as long as they're smaller ones. If they're just the simple ones that go into most small cameras, no one's going to ask anything about those. It's the big ones, the big V mounts or Anton Bauers that you have to. And we've never tried to carry more than 2, I think, per person. And you cannot check those. Like you cannot check batteries. Don't in general, but definitely. Any production level battery, you got to put it in your carry-on. You got to figure that out.
Courtney?
Yeah, Alex is right. The TSA rules now do not allow lithium-ion batteries in the cargo hold. So if you do have a bunch of those batteries, you got to get them to your location, ship them overnight to the location because they can travel that way. And there's still limitations on some shippers who will not travel with them on planes. So bear that in mind. That you can carry them on carry-on. There's a limit, I think, to the number or the wattage of the batteries you can carry and carry on. So check with all airlines have a baggage restriction information on their websites. So check that out and read it for whatever airline you're traveling.
Next question. Oh, I'm sorry, Bill.
Oh, that's all right. I was just going to mention really quickly that for all the small batteries in my life, I have moved to ordering from MarkerTech or other similar things, those little battery cases, particularly for the small ones like AA's. You can get ones that each individual battery slips into its own thing. If you've ever had a pocket full of those come out of devices and for some reason they manage to tap positives and negatives together and generate a lot of heat, you realize that's one of the major problems is you want to keep those terminals completely separated. And there are cases for most battery styles that will ensure that.
Now we can go to the next question.
Now, Roberto Barrow, Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. I was given a 2012 13-inch MacBook Pro several years ago, and it's still working today, but the battery life is very short. Is it worth getting the battery replaced, or should I just cry once and buy a new one?
Alex?
You should buy a new one. It's not like in 2012. Here's the deal: is that I would at 2012 I would use this as some kind of little server or clock or something, but it's not. I wouldn't try to put it back into production or use anything else. Put it somewhere where you can keep it plugged in. I have plenty of these computers, these laptops, and you put them somewhere where they can be used. You can even close them and connect them to a monitor, and they're just no longer a laptop. But the amount of cost it's going to take for you to update it is not worth it. Yeah. So, Jeffrey,
I have a 2012 actually right behind me, which I use every now and then. It's an i7, so it really depends on the processor that you have inside there as to what you can do, as Alex said. But it's also a Mac that's going to run more legacy software, especially I believe in the 16-bit range. So you should be able to run any type of older software from there. But it for the most part, the one I have is fairly useful for some very basic things. And of course, if you know how to open up the case and change the battery yourself, it's going to be pretty inexpensive.
And Bill?
Yeah, for that particularly, if you feel comfortable, iFixit usually has the battery parts and absolutely detailed instructions as to how to open up your computer case, go in and do something simple like this. You're talking about a 2012 computer, so if things go wrong, you're not losing anything because it's probably designed for recycling anyway. But if you want to see if you can replace that battery and do it, I've had really good success following their instructions and doing things myself.
Next question.
Chris Widney in Lafayette, Indiana says, Reddit is the latest company to be hacked with phishing. What can administrators do to get through to users not to click on email links?
Alex?
Nothing. I'd love to tell you that. So when you're in I've worked in some areas where we're under a fair bit of a risk. And what happens is that the administrators are sending out phishing that is going to tell you that you did the wrong thing over and over and over again. We were getting them when we were in a kind of a state, potentially a state target, environment. We'd probably get a bad email about once every day or two. That was from us. So it was constantly testing people. So there's companies that will do this for you, and you pay a service and it costs a certain amount per employee or as a general service, and they literally send phishing to people all the time. And when they click on it, it goes, "Hey, you shouldn't have clicked on that." You shouldn't have clicked on that, and it reports you. So then you have a conversation with your manager about why you clicked on it and how it's not there to punish people. It's just there to. But if they keep on clicking on them, then it starts to be more punishing. so that it only takes a couple times for people to click on the wrong thing before they just stop clicking on everything, because they don't want to get in trouble. So the best way to do it is to hire a security firm that's going to basically phish your employees constantly and remind them and show you that it's happening. And that's really the best way to handle it. That's the only way you're going to get employees to stop doing it.
And Jeffrey.
Education. Every site, every place is going to get hacked or phished or whatever at one point in time. It's just a human thing that happens. What's called user error, and the real question is, how can you recoup from what just happened? And that's where education comes in. So you learn what steps you need to do. Don't hide the fact that you clicked on that email, that you were the culprit, because if they can find the ground zero, at least they can work from that point. So making sure that everybody knows that if it happens, it's going to happen. Just make sure that you are very straightforward in how you contributed to this problem so it can be fixed properly.
All right, we are now at the top of the hour, and we're making our transition to speak to Tim Moore with View Technologies. Producers, go ahead and submit your questions around virtual productions as we dive in. Welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, everyone loves a good origin story, and you went from Diamond View, I think it's Diamond View Studios, to then now actually spinning out a new company that's focused on virtual productions. But even before that, talk to us about your start in the production, like traditional production and advertising space.
Sure. Well, I got into the video industry really by accident about 20 years ago. I was at a church and I got an opportunity to go on a missions trip to Dominican Republic, and I had no clue what a mission trip was. I figured it was a vacation. So I showed up at the airport in board shorts and flip-flops, and I realized that this was no vacation. There was bags and bags of medical supplies and clothes and water. And where the church was going was on the border of Haiti, where it was an area that needed a lot of help. And so since I didn't have any of the other supplies, one of the counselors came over to me and said, "Hey, you're going to be the video guy." And I was like, "Okay, well, what does that guy do?" They're like, "Well, you just hold this camera." He gives me a VHS camera to put on my shoulder. And he goes, that button on the back, whenever you click it, it blinks red, and whatever you point at goes in, and whatever goes in comes back. So just bring back some memories from this trip, and that'll do really well for us. So I get on this flight, get over to Santo Domingo, and we get about 30 people into a bus that holds about 10 people. And as I'm going down the street, I'm getting a third world education on how to shoot video. We go from a concrete road to a dirt road to eventually there's no road. And I realized this is unlike anywhere I've ever seen in America. And we pulled up to what's called the borderland. It's right on the edge of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And the kind of poverty out there we've never seen before. I mean, these people would be jealous to have the problems we have in America. And I was capturing this, through the lens of this camera. And it was so compelling to me because I thought, man, if other people could see what I'm seeing right now, it would give them a lot of insight to how lucky they are. And I shot that video and came back about a week later, and they asked me to do the edit for it as well. So my first amateur edit, cutting up what I had shot there in the Dominican, and I got to play it in front of the whole church on the big screen. And there's something about seeing your work, in front of a crowd, amplified, and hearing and feeling the bass from the music. And so as I'm watching people watch it, I couldn't help but imagine that, I'm going to get the Golden Globe for this. I'm going to walk on the stage and collect the Emmy afterwards. And once the video ends, nobody reacts, not a single clap, not anything. And what I realized is as they turned the lights back up, people were actually crying because of the video. And so
this was your first project.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And, it was the content more than anything, just seeing the condition in which these people were living. And, that group leader came on the stage and said, if anyone wants to help these people, we're just going to pass around a bucket and whatever you can give, they'd appreciate it. And I saw people that, had never been to that country before, never met those people. And 2 minutes ago, didn't even know about the cause. Were taking money out of their wallet and giving to the cause. And I thought, man, that's the kind of advertising that I want to do. And so I was 15 years old at the time, decided, I'm gonna keep doing this because I kind of got hooked on it. And then later started Diamond View once I graduated.
And what makes this story great, and just even our audience on a Monday, office hours overall, but on Mondays we have like a mix of the business and the marketing side of things, but then also the innovation. And from Diamond View, and then like many of us experienced during the pandemic, there was a shift for all of us. And you went from advertising Emmy Award winning advertising to now virtual production. Can you bridge that gap for us and tell us how you got in there?
Yeah, well, I ended up interning at that church for a few years and started Diamond View as a wedding company. The Diamond View name was because I was helping people when I was younger, just kind of get their first wedding video, and it opened up this door into the commercial world. Which fast forward 15 years, we grew that business and it became the largest video production company in Tampa. And when the pandemic had just come on, we were in a great place. It was the best year we ever had. We were just shooting some work down at the Super Bowl in Miami, and I realized very quickly that I had no contingency plan for a pandemic. With the way that I built the business, because most of our clients were tourism. You couldn't travel anywhere. The other portion of clients were in the sports world, and every arena was shut down. And then our third vertical was medical, and you couldn't get into a hospital. So I thought really quickly, like, hey, I'm going to be out of business in a few months if I can't figure out how to be able to shoot the way we used to. And that was when it clicked that virtual production could be that paradigm shift, that instead of going to the location, we could bring the location to us. And to give you a little background on View, Diamond View, the production company, we built View just as a studio for ourselves at first. But what we found was after about 3 months, the studio was outpacing that legacy business that we built for 15 years, that we needed to roll it out into its own company. And so one of the things that happened that was kind of the launching point for us is that in 2020, or 2021 rather, we opened in January, and in February the Super Bowl was in Tampa Bay that year. And so the Today Show had gotten wind that there was this virtual production company shooting commercials, and this is a new way of doing production during COVID. And we ended up getting featured on the Today Show during the Super Bowl weekend. And after that, it just kind of took off like a rocket ship. And so we've been growing ever since.
And we're a community. We love like the nitty gritty part, like dialing down. And so when it came to the virtual productions part one, can you break that down for some people who are watching who might not understand what that necessarily means? And did you have to hire people who understood it? Was there some research component? Because it is still a relatively new space.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good thing about COVID is we had about 30 people on staff that had nothing to do for several months. And so we all took turns in researching, how we could get this off the ground. We had really never done any visual effects before. And virtual production is essentially using a large LED screen for real-time graphics to create this illusion that you're somewhere that you're not by creating a virtual environment. And so, there's several aspects to it. One of them is the camera tracking, being able to, accurately get parallax in the camera every time that it moves. And for us, that was, it took 2 or 3 months to even just figure out how that worked. There wasn't a lot out at this time. Not a lot of people were doing virtual production when we had started. And so it was a lot of tinkering and success by failure. And so, over time, everyone contributed in various ways to help get it off the ground. But one of the probably most interesting things that a lot of people don't know is when we went to go purchase the LED, we realized, man, we essentially did a bet on the business that we'd either, one, be able to get this off the ground and be successful, or two, at least it would explode in a grandiose way. So we took all the money in the business and bought the LED with it, but we couldn't afford brand name LED. So we bought it component by component overseas. We found out that in Shenzhen, you could buy the SMDs. We got the PSUs, which are generic. We went to Guangzhou for the cabinets. And so as we look at, there's 5 major components of an LED. It's similar to building a custom computer. If you know what they are and get the right combination, you can get the right performance out of it. And so we essentially assembled our own LED to make our first stage. And what was really unique is that after that Today Show ad aired, we had people calling from all over the world, from India, from Australia, from Malta, which I had never even heard of before. I didn't know it was a country. I thought it was some kind of milkshake. And they were asking, we want to buy your LED. And the first 7, 8, 9 people, we were like, hey, we don't sell the LED. We just kind of, figured it out. And then by about the 10th person, we said, okay, we'll help build it for you. And that was, a big move for us, because that's now become one of our biggest parts of our business, is building studios for others.
And what did those virtual productions look like in the early days compared to where you are now?
Well, before we got the camera tracking, we had a rear projection screen we'd use for sports, because the challenge with shooting sports is you have a very limited window with the athlete. And so we would set up the rear projection screens literally in the player parking lot. They would get out of their car and we would shoot the commercials as fast as we could. So we had understood, shooting with virtual backgrounds, but not in the sense of a real-time game engine, not in the sense of a motion tracking and virtual cameras. So for us, that's how it started, was just really using 2D plates and doing essentially what we call 2.5D, where we put the person far enough from the background that they actually parallax, in relation to the screen. But once we had moved from rear projection to the volume, that was where we could really do the full virtual production, which is in a 3D game engine, essentially using a virtual background and tracking to give the illusion.
And for those who are possibly doing some research now, as they're listening to you answer these questions, you went from building out the studio for yourselves, for your internal work, but then now you've expanded to other locations. And there's this line that you said, I remember reading it, is you're on a mission to create the world's largest network of virtual production studios for the film, television, and advertising industries. And there's also a form of training that happens as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the business model in that as well?
Yeah, one thing I realized over the years is that anytime the internet hits an industry, it's extremely disruptive. And this is the first time that the internet has really hit studios. I mean, for 100 years, we've gone in these boxes and we paint the walls green and imagine what's there. But now with real-time technology, not only can we shoot in virtual worlds, but we can connect studios in a way we never have before. People can participate in a decentralized type of production. And so when we found that was not only useful, but a way to really create a lot of efficiencies, we began connecting our studios. And so we have 4 corporate-owned studios in Las Vegas, Nashville, Tampa, and Orlando. And what we found is that when you can pool your resources, whether that's the environments, like we have a virtual backlot that hosts most of our environments, or the creative talent on the network, you start getting these network effects that you couldn't have in a single location. one of the advantages to Hollywood is everyone's there. You have the directors, the DPs, the producers, they're all in one centralized spot. When you create a network that allows that same thing to happen, but it defies location, now you begin to get something extremely valuable. And so as we begin expanding our network, today we have 20 studios in the View network, 16 of which we've built for clients and affiliates. We're starting to see more and more network effects. And so what you had mentioned before about the learning, I mean, this is the most challenging part. When you're in an emerging industry, where do you go Google this? Nobody knows this stuff. And like I was saying before, a lot of figuring it out is breaking it and putting it back together. And, my philosophy is we had a few cracks in the pipe, admittedly, when we first started. And there's two ways you can fix that. One is you go pipe by pipe and find the crack, or two, you just turn the water on high. You'll find the cracks really quick. And so that's what we did. We went across all the studios, did our best workflows, used our best tech stack, and we would create new standards every week. We would say, all right, this is the best way to do it, until the following week we said, all right, we learned something new. We're going to do it this way now. And so what that's done is it's culminated a lot of learnings that now someone starting in virtual production doesn't have to start from scratch, because not only have we learned in our studios, but now we're learning from our clients. And we've created this community where people can get a quick start into virtual production. You don't have to start from ground zero. And I think that's something that's really valuable to the network.
And as you talk about the expansion and the breaking and putting back together, and you have also raised 17, I think it was last year, 17 million in funding. How important was it to raise funding for your ability to grow?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is if you're growing an organic business, like I did at my production company, there's going to be some limitations on how quick you can go to market. And one of the things we realized early on is that this is a relatively blue ocean type of environment. Meaning that there's not a lot of competition. This is still an emerging industry. The adoption rate from the general public is still pretty low. And so when you look at the ability to quickly go to market, you need a lot of capital to do so. And so that was one of the ideas behind accelerating our growth, was that, hey, we need to get some serious cash to build out this network. But two, we may never get this opportunity again. And, if you look at different companies, like Facebook's a great example of it. I mean, they're hacking the network over at Harvard to get their first kind of users on there. And then they continued to expand and got to the point that they hit escape velocity. And escape velocity is the point that you're growing so fast the competition can't catch up. And when you look at what Google Circles did, Google Circles spent 3 years building the best social media platform in the world, and then nobody wanted to use it. And so there's that first mover advantage that you can only gain by moving quick. And so that was when I look at what our philosophy was to do the raise and go quick to market. We were trying to really accelerate our growth of the network.
Awesome. We'll get into some of the questions from the panel. Alexander.
Yeah, just looking at these studios, which look incredibly impressive. What I'd like to know is, when you sat down during the planning stages for the construction, I imagine there would have been a lot of variables involved. What were some of the non-negotiables where you said, we have to get this right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, color is a big one of them. If you can't, particularly the grayscale values, if you're shooting on something, and this is why projection's so difficult to do virtual production on, if you're shooting on something and you can't get deep blacks, it's not going to look real to the viewer. And so one of the big things that we, from day one, have been really critical about is the shader. Not a lot of people think about the shader. The shader is the little black plastic piece between the pixels. So you'll hear a lot about pixel pitch, what color depth, the panels are, the refresh speed, the clocking on it, the read write. Nobody talks about the shader. The shader is one of the most important things because you see light through shadows. In the absence of shadows, there is no light. And so your eye understands what levels are based on the relative scale of that luminosity. So for us, having a deep black shader was very important. Now, if you're going to do this in a billboard, that doesn't matter as much. You're competing with natural daylight. Your objective is to be seen from miles away. If you're shooting something that you're trying to convince the eye is real, the shader is important. And it's something that if you asked, 9 out of 10 people probably wouldn't say that was a non-negotiable. For us, that was something we found out early on that we had to have right in all the stages.
Alex?
I have a few questions. So anyway, when you said there were 5 components, what are those? Can you explain what the 5 components are of the wall? So
the cabinet is what the panel is encased in, and so that's just the metal frame for it. The PSU, the power supply, that is the gives power to the panel. The SMD, that is the actual pixels on the front of the board. And the hub board is what allows the data to be distributed to the different SMDs. Typically on a standard panel, you have 4 modules in a cabinet. And so those 4 SMD modules are delivered data through the hub board. And then the final thing is the receiving card. And so you'll hear a lot about processing for LED. You have 2 types of processing. One is the sending card, which is the processor that's on the computer side, sending out to the wall. But then you have the receiving card, and this is equally as important because that sits on the actual panel itself. And so the receiving card has a lot of the data needed for the color science on it. And you can tweak this, depending on how fast you want to put the clock speed of the panel, depending on what frame rate you're using, that could be very important. And so those 5 things, there's a lot of mixtures you can do to them, but without those, you need each of them to really make it work.
And so you were buying all these components separately. So you're not buying anything that's like can slide together. You're building them from scratch, essentially.
Yeah. And these are all common components. If you go online and look up SMD board and put a particular pixel pitch in, you'll find there's hundreds of vendors. The challenge becomes getting the right mixture. And that's where you'll start to see things like, for instance, Nation Star is a very popular SMD. You have different scales of that. If you were to use the wrong type of receiving card with the wrong pixel pitch, it might not have the data load to actually be able to run all of those pixels. Right. So if you're using a fine pitch, you're going to need a particular type of receiving card. So that's all this information is online. I wouldn't suggest the way we did it to do it because it is a challenge. It's probably best for a professional to put it together, but it's a great way to learn it because when you build something, you learn it at a level that you never could if you just buy it. And so that's really helped us over the years. And
what kind of cost savings do you get from buying just the pre-built panels?
Probably a tenth of the cost of what brand name LED is. Yeah.
Interesting. And what's the pitch of the panels that you usually use?
All across the board. So, from 1.9 up to 3.9. Okay. And there's advantages to each. So pixel pitch is the distance between the center of a pixel to the center of the following pixel. And so it's not the gap in between. But the one thing that actually changes is what is the size of your pixel capsule. So if you have a large capsule, like let's say a SMD 2020, that's a 0.20 millimeter capsule on that pixel. If you're doing that on a tight pitch, you're essentially pixel to pixel. So you don't have a lot of room for the shader in between. But if you're shooting on a 3.9 and you have an SMD 1515, which is a pretty small capsule, now you have a lot of black space in between. So all of these things are parts of the SMD that you may play with if you want a desired effect. And I tell people, a common misconception is the finer the pixel pitch, the better it is. It's actually not true because you're increasing the reflective surface area of the LED when you do that. When we're shooting night scenes, we actually prefer to shoot on a 3.9. And the reason is you have more of that black fill space. And it also taxes the processor less. When you look at the image you're sending to the screen, these are millions of dots, all have to be processed. On a 3.9 pitch, you have 3 times less pixels than you would on a 1.9. And so the idea of knowing what your compute resources are and how many pixels you can actually drive is an important thing to consider when you're building your stage, because some of the stages we have are 150, 160 feet across. You're talking 24K, 30K images that you need to consider.
And how much of a challenge is Moray, and how do you manage that?
Well, there's 2 ways to manage it. One is depth of field. The shallower the depth of field, the less of an issue it is. And then the second is the distance of the actor to the screen. And so, on a typical XR stage, and there's an important thing to distinguish between an XR stage and an LED volume, which is more considered ICVFX, in-camera visual effects. XR stages typically have all of the LED in focus. And the reason for this is that they're reprocessing the image on the computer side. And so what they're getting in camera is also supplemented with what they're compositing through the computer in real time. Mm-hmm. In that instance, the Moray isn't as big of an issue because they're overlaying on it.
Right.
But in what we do, our goal is final pixel in camera. And so we never want Moray. It blows the whole effect. And so we're particularly looking for that in everything we shoot. And like I said before, it's just distance or depth of field. If you figure out that right combination, you'll never see it.
Are you using a custom build of Unreal, or are you?
No, we go out vanilla. We're using 5.1 on most of our stages right now, and we use in-display. And so...
And are you connecting the studios in real time so they can talk to each other? So when you're talking about connected studios, and if so, what protocol are you using to connect them?
Yeah, so we use something called Sienna Engine, which is an NDI orchestrator. Mm-hmm. And what it allows us to do is from each stage, we have a feed of all the cameras that are on that network, and we could feed it to any of the other stages. And so, our model, it's less of a hub and spoke, one to many, and more of a many to many, to mesh network. And so this allows us to do really unique combinations of signal flow from Vegas to Nashville, Tampa, and vice versa.
And what kind of latency do you get between the locations?
It's very, very quick. I mean, 4 milliseconds, Tampa to Orlando. We're 10 gig. Yeah, fiber. We try to be point to point. I mean, you have to make a hop on a few of these places, but it's as much as we could try to be point to point, we are.
And do you find that clients want to do that, where they're doing multiple events, where they have a speaker in one place, a speaker in another?
No, it's kind of unnecessary right now. It's just a feature that we see for the future. When you look at what type of network would the metaverse need to run on, we know that it's a much more high speed, higher bandwidth than what we currently have. So we're building a network not for today, but for tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Courtney?
A couple of technical questions. It sounds like you're still building your own LED modules and walls. And in your SMB devices, are the individual LED elements coincident, or do they go through a little light pipe so that they all come out at the same point so that your shader doesn't occlude any one color if you get off axis? And, there's one question. I've got another one after that.
Yeah. So, the way that the SMD works is that it stands for surface mounted diode, and the distance of which that's mounted can vary. The higher it is, the more viewing angle you have, but it also creates spill and contamination because each pixel is now lighting the pixel adjacent to it. So when you're talking about viewing angle, it's a very important thing. Every in common LED, you have an RGB. So if you were to go on the right side of the panel, you would see the blue diode more because you're actually occluding the green and the red because you're looking straight on at the blue. And you see this shift happen a lot in ceilings. When you're looking at that angle, it might get a blue shift or a red shift. And so the way that we work with that is a scalloped capsule. So the way the scalloped capsule works is it's a lens on top of the LED, where instead of it being a square or flat edge, it's actually scalloped. And so that prevents the shift of color because you're actually seeing the top of the LED reflecting the other color as it shifts. And so it's a very nuanced way to get around color shift, but it prevents having that red blue that you see a lot of times when you get a little too far over.
And the other question I had is about your camera tracking system. You didn't talk about that. Are you using multiple camera infrared cameras with retroreflective markers? Are you using an overhead target type system with witness cameras? Are you using combination of encoders and lenses? What's your camera tracking system?
We use an inside-out method. So we're on most of our stages, we're using MOSIS, which is an absolute-based system. It uses the infrared emitter on top of the camera, and then it looks up at the star constellation, which, like you're saying, is the retroreflectors randomized in the ceiling, and from that you're able to triangulate the position of the camera in a subframe time. And that's important because you got to think about the feedback loop of virtual production is a very orchestrated time sequence event. So when you have a tracker like the MOSIS tracker, when you turn it on, because it's an absolute based system, meaning that the stars stay where they're at, you don't need to calibrate them each time it knows its position. The movement has to be interpreted by the computer, rendered out to the processor, put on the screen before the next frame on the camera. And so that's a very quick subsampling type of event that happens. And for us, what we've found is typically you have to use Genlock in order to do this because you're syncing several systems. We found that with our LED, that's not a necessary thing to do. And the reason is the way that we're clocking the whole system. A lot of times we'll do 60 hertz or 120 hertz on the screen itself, and we'll have different intervals in the camera, but it'll be a multiple of whatever we're seeing on the screen. And so that allows us to stay in frame sync, even if the Genlock is disconnected. And so going back to your original question about the tracking, while its primary use case is for figuring out where the position of the camera is, it also is the most important part of the entire system when it comes to latency and speed. Because if you get that one slow, everything else will be disorienting. And so that's something that we found too. It's so important to start the priority of virtual production at the tracking level and then go down to the display level.
Great.
And pulling in this comment from our producers, Nathan says, this sounds like the craziest and riskiest way to have done when you've been learning about it in just a couple of months and you put every cent you have into it. LOL. Glad it worked out for Tim, but man. So with that, what's been the biggest lesson that you've learned through this process, that because you are this is emerging tech, what's been the biggest lesson in this part of your journey?
Well, the interesting thing about COVID was that good businesses that had great business plans were going out of business, regardless of if they took a risk or not. And so as I evaluated what, the next 9 months was going to be like in the production company, and that was about how much cash we had left was 9 months to stay open. I just thought to myself, would I rather not take a risk and dwindle down to my last dollar, or, give it everything I got. And if it doesn't work out, at least I went out in a bang. And so, sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit. It paid off for this one. We're lucky. I wouldn't say this is a business model people should go out and try. This could have easily been a story in the opposite direction, but it was a bit of a Cinderella type launch with spending every dollar we had, putting it together. Thank God it worked, and then getting on the Today Show and now growing across the U.S. Really, for us, the next step is figuring out what's the next mountain to climb, because we think that virtual production is just a gateway drug into something much bigger. And visual effects used to be an area that was only really entered by the top of the market. I mean, you think about for years, visual effects was just for the blockbuster Hollywood films, and now it's coming all the way down to a kid with a laptop in their dorm room can make incredible stuff nowadays. And that's what technology's done to democratize access to this type of this type of opportunity. And so we want to continue to do that. And that's kind of one of our goals, is that we want to see this technology continue to empower young people to get in the industry.
All right, Bill, let's get into these questions.
Absolutely. The first one comes from Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he asked, what sync system do you use for the LED wall?
Yeah, so our Genlock is on a Everett's, and we typically, based on what frame rate we're doing, we'll have the DP tell us what we want to put the system in. And so on most of our stages, that's the system we're using.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with Virtual Productions. What processing engine are you using for your homebrew LED system?
Well, we use a little bit of everything. So Novastar was the first one we started using. Today we use a lot of Brompton as well. And Megapixel, we're working on something with Unilumin right now that we're pretty excited to debut here pretty soon.
Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington up next. Which client groups were or are the easiest to bring into the virtual production world? Which were the most troublesome?
I would say the visionaries. We were really fortunate that during COVID, Disney had a operation in Orlando and they had an operation in Anaheim. And during that time, the Orlando office opened up a little bit sooner than the Anaheim one did. And they had a lot of production that shifted to the East Coast. They were already a visionary in the space. I mean, they did Mandalorian. They understood the technology, so they were an early adopter. We were able to do a lot of work with them, and that helped us early on, continue to grow to more clients. But I would say, when you look at what are the most challenging clients, it's people that don't want to take the risk. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a new way of doing things. And if you have something that works, it can be scary to try to take it out of the field and into the studio and make it look as realistic as you want. So we found that people that are, early adopters tend to be on the front end of technology. They're the best clients for us because they're open to taking the risk. And then more the conservative video agencies, they're probably going to wait a couple of years to try this technology out.
And when you say risk, can you break that down a little more? Is it the new workflow that because they're in a traditional mindset? Like, what level of risk if your team is the one providing the stage and helping them to actually get their product out?
Well, I would say it's a major risk all the way across the board. If you think about it, you have people that have been doing production one way for the last 50 years, and now you throw them into an LED volume, and the DP has to learn, the settings on the camera, what shutter speeds he can't do, how he's going to sync with the screen. The gaffer now has to really understand that light spill is important, that you have to contain light. He has to understand that an RGB rendition of a color space is much different than what we have on the high fidelity color production lights. And, how do you make the combination of those two look realistic? The producer now has to understand the time constraints of the brain bar, which is the people holding the entire shoot hostage in the back there as they're drilling away on the environments. That the director now has to have patience to say, hey, even though he says something in an instant, it may take the real-time animators in the back to a few minutes to make that happen. And so, to be very honest about the risks, there's several, because unless you've done this multiple times, you're learning for the first time. And a lot of times virtual production's at a premium. So, people are paying a very large rate, and then you got a big project on the line, the client's there in the room. And so I think that's been one of the biggest challenges we see with people entering into virtual production is they want to do it on a test project, not on a real project, which is understandably how things should go. You'd hate to bring your biggest budget client in and then be learning on the spot in front of them. But that is something that I think is in the back of a lot of people's mind is, hey, I haven't done this before. Is this the right project for me to bring into virtual production?
And you actually saw somewhere where you had shared that every production doesn't make sense. What kind of production would you say, you know what, stick to the traditional model? Virtual is not the way to go.
Tons of productions. I would say if you could shoot in a park, go shoot in a park. You know, that's a lot easier than, bringing in the park to the virtual studio, trying to get all of those settings exactly the same. You know, what becomes really valuable is if you're shooting in a park and the mountains and then the beach, because those things would be very challenging to do. Or you go into a forest and you need, 30 of the trees removed. That's hard in the real world. So you look at things that are logistically difficult, and that becomes a piece of cake in the volume. So when I look at what type of concepts work well, I really just do the common sense test. Would this be easier just to walk out with a camera and shoot it? And if so, you're going to have a $50,000 a day less premium because you're not going into this high tech environment and, commanding all these resources. But I will say on the flip side, what's something really good to do in virtual production? Automotive all day. I mean, that's probably, hate to put a number on it, but probably 35, 40% of our work. I mean, you're shooting something that's a mirror in every direction. You know how difficult that is on location. And then you got to get permits, and then you're now in a high-speed vehicle that can kill people, and you're going to try to shoot that. I mean, that's like launch a missile down the street and then get a bunch of people to run after and try to capture it. That is a challenging feat to do. High-end automotive. You put that car in a virtual stage and oh man, it's everyone's high-fiving. They're like, this is amazing. Another thing too, people don't realize when you have a target that's that large, that's that reflective, now all of your modifiers need to be equally scaled. And so, I recall going on locations where we'd have 40 buys on cranes over the cars just to get the belt line reflection just right. Now, that same big 40-foot white box, there's a kid in the back of the room who just pops that square on the screen in 3 seconds. I mean, that was like 10 gaffers and the wind's blowing and it's like a sail, that you think the thing's going to fly away. That now is so easy. So I say this to say that there are things that are amazing in virtual production. And if you find those and you can double down and keep doing it that way, that's better for the client, for the crew, for everybody. But there's some stuff that's just common sense to shoot it outside the studio. And so we let people know, and this happens more times than not, to say, hey, these scenes would be good in virtual production, but the other part of this script, you should probably just go shoot on location.
Next question.
I love that answer. Jesse Mills, San Francisco Bay Area. What camera tracking systems are you using and why?
So we use like I was saying earlier, the MOSIS. And for us, it's about reliability and ease of use. And so the MOSIS system, because it's an inside out system, when you turn it on, it knows its absolute value in space with no calibration. So you calibrate it once, and then it uses the star constellation to understand its exact position. So in a commercial environment, which is what our studios are, and I should mention that, we don't go after the feature film industry. We've done some feature films, but our client is someone who comes in for 2 days and then is on to the next project. So we have quick turns in all of our studios, and so it's important that the technology turns on and works. And so that was one of the big factors when looking at a tracking system. And that MOSIS Star Tracker has been a great one for us.
Courtney?
Yeah, if you have an overhead LED for car shots, let's say, to do the reflections, doesn't that interfere with the overhead tracking system?
That's a great question. So the first time we built our ceiling, we had that problem. And that's actually probably the least problem when you have an overhead ceiling. The bigger problem is you've now created a parabolic shape with the volume, and then you put a lid on top of it. This is probably the worst thing you can do for audio because you're inside of a can, and this can is reflective and it multiplies the sound. And so what we realized was, not only can I not get tracking, It sounds horrible. And then what about the lights that are back here? Now all the lights are cut off. So what we created was a perforated LED. And what it is it's you see this in live events. They call them blow through LED. But we've spaced this a little bit differently than your common blow through. What it does is every other pixel line is removed, and that allows us to let the audio escape through the ceiling. It allows the heat to move up through there. That's the vortex effect is real. You go inside, 50 million light bulbs, and it gets hot. The people don't talk about this, but you start cooking that thing. I mean, we're about 350,000 watts on our Orlando stage. I mean, that's a microwave when you get in there with a bunch of people. So that heat dissipation is important too to go through the ceiling. But what we found, and you can see this on the website, is when we were able to perforate the panel at the right distance, you can't actually see it from the camera because it's like beams in a house. If you put the beams at the right distance, because you're on an angle, you never see the ceiling. You just see the next beam in line. And so what that allowed us to do is put the tracking in between the gaps. And so we actually have our stars in our ceiling embedded into the LED, and then our lights are above the ceiling. And so this is particularly interesting. And sometimes it's, people scratch their heads on why we would do that. But think again about the case of automotive. If I have a mirror in every direction, where do I put the backlight that I don't see it? That's challenging. But if you have a two-way LED, meaning that you can see it one way, but you can't, and light can pass through the other, now we can actually put all the lighting in the ceiling. And if there's a sun on the middle, right at the north point, we can just beam a spotlight right through there, and it looks motivated from that spot. So that's something really unique about our ceiling panel, and you can learn more about it on the website.
So lighting through the LCD panel, it acts really kind of like a diffuser then to some degree, right?
It acts more like a grid. So, the interesting thing about it is, if you were to put a grid onto a light, it would focus it in a direction. And so the way that the light is perforated on the east and west sides of the volume, we can go on a really good angle. But if you were to try to go a very hard angle north or south, it's going to stop it because it's actually blocking the light from going through. So it's better to go straight down there. But on an LED stage, the unique thing is when your camera is inside of it, there is no orientation to where the world is. You can just turn the whole world around. And so the gaffer goes, oh, I need a backlight, but I can't do it back there because the way the LED is. We go, all right, well, let's just turn the whole world 90 degrees. And a lot of times people fall out of their chair. They're like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, look.
It makes the reverses very easy.
Don't move all these lights, people. Everybody stop. We're just going to move the world real quick. And when they see that, they're like, oh, wow, my conception of how I would light and move and the way the AD times out these kind of choreographed relights is totally different now. I mean, we have on some of our stages, like in Orlando, I was saying 155 feet. We just do 5 sets on all the way across the volume. And then we put the camera in the middle. We shoot set 1, shoot set 2, shoot. There's no reset. The whole commercial is just set on the volume, and we're shooting it one by one. So it's just a paradigm shift to the way production's done in a virtual stage.
And how much training? A polarized lighting grid. That's amazing.
Yeah. How much training do you have to do with like DPs and the crew now with that?
Well,
like you said, that mindset
now that
shift?
it's almost 2 years. A lot of people have been introduced to the technology, some incredibly talented DPs now that are pushing it farther than it's ever been. So I would say now there's much less. We run workshops at about a quarterly cadence at all of our studios, and we invite the video community to come in. We say, hey, try it on our dime, not on your clients. And so that allows them time to practice and play. And a lot of times we learn from that. People will bring in new cameras and we'll try out things and see what works and what doesn't. But yeah, I would say now there's less training time because people have become familiarized with it. But if you're starting from ground zero, you're going to want to spend a couple hours with the screen to really understand how it works and what things you can and can't do. I mean, capabilities are great, but limitations are what you die on. So you got to understand what is the real limitations of this, because the marketers won't tell you that. They'll tell you, you could do everything in the moon, and you can't. So it's really good to understand that.
Next question.
Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area says, what is the smallest space you've used to create a studio, and what is the biggest?
So we have a mobile unit, and we use it for sports. That's about a 20-foot screen that we travel around and shoot on media day with. And so that one, we can get a lot done on it. The challenge becomes you can't move too far left or right, or you fall off screen. The shot begins to fall off the edge. But as far as large screens goes, Orlando is our largest, and that one's 155 by 27 feet tall. We've brought in a 40-foot boat to shoot in there. And so, the idea of being able to have a yacht on a real-time background, and that background isn't the water, is great for the DPs. No bobbing up and down, no wind, no rain delays. So, to each use case, there's a size that makes sense. For shooting a waist up for sports, 20 feet's great. For shooting a yacht, you're going to need something a little bigger.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's interested in what your typical crew complement is for a show.
Good question. What do you mean by that? Like, who is on the set?
Sounds like, yeah. Well, what does that crew look like?
Yeah, so it's a traditional crew. I don't think there's any less or more positions. But on the studio side, we add positions to the brain bar, which is essentially the team that's operating the screen. And so for us, we have three main roles. One is the visual effects supervisor. That is the person that talks to the crew, and then gets, for example, the director says, I want to move the tree. Well, that's an ambiguous command. So he goes back and says, which way do you want to move it? He says left. He goes, all right, well, your left or my left. So he tells the operator, what the crew is trying to do. And then the operator is really just focused on, in the game engine, making that command happen. And the reason why we've done this division of labor is we realize that if you look at an Unreal Engine operator, this is someone who's typically never been in a film environment. I mean, if you went back 2 years ago, these people were developing games in a cubicle. They don't understand when a producer is screaming at them that that's totally normal, that nothing's wrong. It's just they're trying to get things faster. So we've seen meltdowns on stage where there's a difference in culture between a game developer and someone who's operating at the speed of a commercial set. And so that line of communication is very important from the visual effects operator to the stage operator. And then we typically have an LED tech. And the LED tech is working with the DP to make sure that the colors are right, to make sure that everything is, all the timing and the sequencing is working out. So I would say probably on the studio side, you have that 4 or 5 roles that are additional just to make everything run smooth, but everything else is a traditional production.
Next question.
Claude Lopez Waterman in Roanoke, Virginia says, when you have a not traditional ratio, how do you serve the media for it? Disguise, WatchOut?
We're using Pixera, which is a media server that allows us to do similar to what Disguise does. But again, the way that you approach a virtual production shoot depends on what the content is. And I'll give you an example. We were shooting with NASCAR recently, and they wanted to do some look backs on a 50-year history of NASCAR. And what we had was 2D images that we were manually parallaxing on the screen as someone was telling this story. And for us, there's no reason to do that inside of a 3D game engine. That's essentially something After Effects can do, or something that a media server could do. And so as we look at, what our approach is, it's on 3 levels. One is the media server, 2 is Unreal Engine, and then the third is another type of playback system like a Resolume, which is a multi-display, multi-layer player. And that allows us to do a lot of quick changes to 2D assets that aren't typically in a 16:9 ratio. They're normally very large panoramics that would have a challenge in typical video players.
Next question.
Alexander Knight, Vancouver, BC, and here on the panel, what kind of processing power and server farm do you need to accomplish what you've done?
Well, we use Puget Systems, and they've been a great partner for us to help us with the computers. Each stage, varies based on how many pixels are on the screen. So in Vegas, we have 7 render nodes that are helping render all of that image to the screens. In Orlando, we have 8. In Tampa, when we first started, we had 1. And that was a big advantage that was a 3.9 pixel pitch. And at 100 feet, 3.9 pixel pitch is exactly 8K. And on a standard computer with A6000, you have two 4K outputs. You can run a 100-foot screen at 3.9 on a single computer system. So, the render nodes are proportional to how many pixels you're pushing. And typically that's how many 4K slices does that screen contain.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman back from Roanoke. If you want to build a screen that's not a traditional ratio, what's your preferred processor? Novastar?
Processing has very little to do with the ratio on the screen. One of the things that the H series Novastar has an advantage is it has a splicer inside of the processor. So all contained into one, you can stretch, you can fill. And so I would say the H series, if you had an odd shaped display, could be a good one. But if you wanted to use a Brompton system or you had Brompton panels, you would essentially just have to add some type of scaler, to the front end of the signal flow and get the same effect.
Next question.
Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts says, do you see any trends in virtual production solutions, primarily by using single vendors or mixing vendors with APIs?
That's a good one.
Explain to me what the question is on that one.
So go ahead, Bill, sorry.
Yeah, well, it's a little oddly worded. He says, do you see any trends in virtual production solutions by primarily, and then he notes, by single vendors or mixing vendors with APIs? So I think it's depending on how, systems from multiple people.
Do you find, are you like cobbling together a solution with
Yes.
lots of software or...
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the history of production, isn't it? You have the call sheet, and then you have the file folders, and then the graphics guys want something different, and then there's 15 other programs. So that in a VFX workflow, it's always been discombobulated. What we've found is that we're pushing as much as we can into the real-time engine, and so a majority of our workflow happens in Unreal, but we have blueprints to help us do other things. So I would say if you look at our tech stack, we have about 3 different playback systems and media servers, and then everything that's on the front end of creating, that's all done in Unreal. And so we're typically not, if we can avoid it, we're not going through a Cinema 4D or a Maya or messing with Revit or anything else before we go into Unreal. We just start in Unreal.
Courtney?
And one thing I didn't ask is, do you have to bring in a motion base if the actors have to be jostled around or experience differences in?
Depends what your budget is. Yeah. If you don't have a budget, it's a 4x4 piece of wood underneath the tire that you're making the car go up and down.
2 grips.
But yes, we do have 2 Bolt X robots, and so the cinema robots help on the camera motion side of things. We don't have necessarily a gimbal for cars or any of that kind of like vehicle movement.
I guess they just program in the background movement for the boat.
You can. I mean, there's something to the effect of seeing
the way back
exactly. But the way we've seen it on our stages is a lot of times it will use small airbag systems on the wheels that can inflate and deflate quickly. Linear actuators too are a lot cheaper than a full-blown motion base. So those are kind of some effects that we use.
And for our final question of the hour,
Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona says, you mentioned that you graduated from college. What was your major, and how did what you learned there help you with the work you do now?
Yeah, so I went to college for marketing. I graduated high school. I didn't graduate college yet. I'm on a sabbatical that started about 20 years ago, and so one of the things that was helpful is, when we started View, we realized because there was no brand name in virtual production, it was just The Mandalorian was what everyone knew. We needed to make something that was short, sweet, and memorable. And so I think that was, where we had kind of had the advantage of running a production company that for years had been making marketing videos for people to see what kind of worked and didn't. And that's been a big priority for us, is using that marketing knowledge to kind of build the brand View.
And Tim, we thank you so much for your time with us today. And we want to give you the final word. And just to point out, everyone wants you back. All the comments are like, we want an on-site meetup. So we'll see if we can coordinate that with our office hours community. But what's next for View Technologies?
Oh, just staying curious. If you do what you always done, you're going to give what you always got. So you just got to get out there and try something new. We'll be breaking things and making things. So I think that, when we look at what does a year from now look like, with AI, the world's going to be completely different. And we're excited about what that world will be. The last thing I'll leave you with is virtual production is really just an illusion of the screen, but seeing the world in a virtual world through these multi-user simulations is essentially what they are. I think in the next year, all the hype about Web3, metaverse, all of that will be a lot closer than it is today. And having that technology learned today will be a big advantage for people tomorrow. So keep doing it.
Thank you so much, Tim, for being here. Everyone who's watching, the link is in the chat for Mukana, our Mukana community. And thank you for our producers for submitting all of your wonderful questions, and our panelists for your responses. And to just share tomorrow, we're going to go through the Super Bowl ads and graphics. So you just got a taste during the first hour, but we're really going to dive in tomorrow during our second hour. And a reminder that the NAB planning meeting takes place later today, 11 a.m. PST. So check the email for more details. And to our production crew, for without which this could not be possible, thank you so much. And it looks like we've gone 32,000 miles today and approximately 52,000 kilometers. That's more than 294 million bananas. For the rest of the schedule for the week, head over to officehours.global, and we'll see you in after hours. Bye. So, Tim, this is when we start whispering. It's not virtual, but it's us whispering, and that's how we close the show. Okay, great episode, Tim. Tim, that was here. Hey, Tim, we gotta talk. I got a space in north of San Francisco. Oh yes, let's do it. 60 or 70 by 70 by 30 with 6,000 amps. Wow. It's not quite enough.
Where in North San Francisco?
San Rafael. It's the old ILM stage. Oh, yes. It's got a model shop right across the parking lot.
That makes me excited.
Yeah. We'll talk.
Okay, thanks.
Swallow this burning. Gonna happen. Yeah. Someone said so much.
How long do we whisper?
Until the team tells us that we're clear. So we're waiting for that any moment now.